So let's take a moment to talk about the geologic time scale. As you've read in class and in your lecture, that geologic time is a really important component of historical geology. It's important because we're going to see from chapters 8 through 17 that we're going to be talking about each different time period and what defines them. So it's important to really understand where this time scale comes from. So as you notice, we can break down the time scale into eons, eras, periods, and epochs. Okay. So each breakdown is going to include a smaller and smaller bit of time. Right? We only have our two eons, right? The Phanerozoic and the Precambrian. And here it's important to note that the Precambrian is definitely separate from the rest of the time scale. And we're going to see that the Precambrian here is going to be chapters 8 and 9 when we get there. We're going to spend the rest of our chapters 10 through 17 in here. So it should already be kind of obvious that we know more about the Phanerozoic than we do about the Precambrian. But I want to take a second here to talk about where this comes from. So the Precambrian, if you notice on the time, the Precambrian goes from 4.6 billion years ago to 570 million years ago. So the Precambrian itself lasts a little over 4 billion years. So that's actually 87% of Earth's time. So most of Earth's time is spent in the Precambrian. Now, because of that, okay, we need to understand a little bit about the Precambrian. As you see, the Precambrian is broken down into three eras: the Hadean, the Archean, and the Proterozoic. Now, in the Hadean, life was really first starting. Okay, if you notice, it sounds like Hades, right? Because Earth was very much like that at the beginning. In the Archean, this is when our continents are first starting to form, and oceans and atmosphere. And in the Proterozoic, we start to see plate tectonics. Now, the important thing here is that the life that we see is mostly going to be single cellular life. Our oldest organisms we're going to see is going to be blue-green algae and cyanobacteria. Now, there's a lot of evolution that's going on in the Precambrian, but not a lot of this stuff is getting fossilized because single cells don't fossilize very well. So, what's important to note here, what I'm trying to say, what's important, is that the Precambrian is defined by geologic events. So these three time eras are going to be defined by major geological happenings. Now, what we're going to see when we get into the Phanerozoic, okay, is that the Phanerozoic is defined by fossils. So we can see that the Phanerozoic is broken down into three eras: the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. Right? Each can be further broken down into our periods, okay, as you can see here, and then the Cenozoic into epochs, okay. But what's important to note here, okay, and this is something that we're going to get into, the geologic timescale was put together long before we knew any of these numbers. So initially, when this timescale was put together, we didn't know any of those. We're going to learn how we come up with those numbers here in a little bit in lecture. So all we had to go on to determine the geologic timescale was either the geology or we can go by fossils. Okay, so in the Phanerozoic, what they saw in the fossil record is that there were these big changeovers. So what we're going to see is that in the Paleozoic is mainly going to be defined by fish and amphibians. At the end of the Paleozoic, right here, we have a huge mass extinction where 96% of all life goes extinct. Now, in the Mesozoic, this is the age of reptiles. And then, of course, right here we have another huge mass extinction where anything over 50 pounds goes extinct. And then, right, the Cenozoic is the age of mammals. So maybe you can see that with each mass extinction that occurs, we have a new group of animals that takes over. So we can define these periods by that fossil turnover. So I want to leave this here because we're going to talk here in a few minutes on where we get those numbers. But I thought it was important enough to interject for a few minutes here so that way you understand the difference between, right, the relative age dating that we do here and then the actual age dating. We're going to get more into this when we get into the Paleozoic era, chapters 10 through 12, because once we get through the Precambrian and the geology stuff, you're really going to see evolution come into play and how easy it defines all of the Phanerozoic. So I'll see you guys in a few minutes in our next Let's Take a Moment.